run me through what happens at Mackey's.
Right, here's what's going on, right? So you turn up in your own clothes, you go into the disabled toilet, in my store anyway, wash your hands, put a face mask on, then one of the managers takes your temperature with one of those guns that you hold at arm's length against your head. And so then they're like, right, you're all right, you know, standard, bog standard temperature.
37 degrees.
Something like that, yep. You go and get changed, stick your uniform on, clock in. It was a bit weird though, because obviously there was
You forgot how to make a Big Mac.
It's really easy, because a Big Mac is just Big Mac sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickle.
How big's the queue?
Huge. So big, in fact, that the police had to pull up because they were causing a bit of a traffic jam. Queuing for about 45 minutes.
I still haven't gone back yet.
Go back next weekend and I might be able to serve you a Big Mac.
It's a large Big Mac with 6 nuggets as well.
Will, we've been on this call for about half an hour now. We've not started the podcast. So with that said...
Who's doing the intro?
After last week, you messed up the ending. And so I feel like you've got to have a second chance, but this time you can do the intro.
Oh, I'm sweating.
Do you remember what we say?
Yeah, I can remember what we say. You ready for this? Best radio voice. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to Something Near the Centre, a podcast about politics, economics and current events. I'm Will.
And I'm James.
And we switched up the intro for once.
Will, you forgot the line, and today we're going to be having a chat.
No, we don't do that.
I do that.
I cringe every time I hear that. It's just like, ugh.
And today we're going to be having a chat. Again, I've done it now.
Is it 6?
Yeah, this is episode 6, so, which is quite good. We're six weeks in. Now, Will, one thing I was thinking about is...
Viewership is declining.
What can you expect? You know, everybody, oh wow, James has got a podcast, let's all listen to his first one. And then when you've got 6 of them, it's kind of like the novelty's worn off.
The first one, I'm still staggered. We got 200 views at that. We've got 19 subscribers.
Shout out to you all.
So we've gone from, you ready for this?
Will, are you eating?
Yeah, dairy milk. So we went 194, 52, 73, 46, 18.
I think last week's was not too bad as well.
Last week's was a really good one.
It was like 12 hours late because of that, a bit of a crisis.
Corrupted
the software seemed to corrupt it when it turned it from a video on the cloud into a downloadable video.
So is it always going to be like Thursday at 8 now when they go up?
It will probably be Thursday.
Who set that goal? Thursday at 8.
Well, my goal used to be for Thursday at 4. So I'll try and get it out for
Thursday at 4. Boom.
Thursday evenings is when it's definitely going to have to be out, and if not, there's been some kind of calamity.
James in the edit, comment over this if we actually made it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, good idea. Well, no, because Will, what if the calamity happens post-editing, like it did last time? Like it was ready to go out at about 8 o'clock, and yet then
you got to dub over it again, saying no, it didn't work.
Okay, so I've got to. Yeah, that's fine. Right, so it's currently 4:20, so we missed that deadline after an unforeseen video call that will later be mentioned on in this podcast. We're looking at 6 o'clock, although you'll already know that because it'll be out by the time you're listening to this, but I'm thinking 6 o'clock should be good.
Yeah. Shall we actually get into some news?
I know, yeah. Let's get into the podcast. Previously, we've been going quite deep into lots of topics. So last week we did Dominic Cummings, and then the George Floyd protests, and then some economics, and then the game. And so, and our worst article, obviously. But this week we're trying to think of maybe, instead of going hugely into depth into the big news stories of the week, because this week's news stories have been relatively light, and there's been a decent amount going on, we could maybe spend a little bit less time on each subject, but do more. So this week, to start, we're going to talk, surprise, surprise, a little bit about coronavirus. Will, any little updates about what's been going on?
Yeah, we've passed 40,000 deaths, but
I can't say I'm surprised, sadly.
No. And this week we've had... today they said we have 55 deaths, but you never trust weekend figures, do you? Because they're always artificial to what they actually are. Yeah. So the last real one we had was 357 on Thursday. And let's put it into context of the whole of Europe. Throughout the week, Spain had 67 deaths in the whole week. That's just putting that how bad this is going now.
There was another statistic where, I can't remember what day it was, but the UK had more deaths than the whole of the rest of the EU combined. that statistic is a bit mind-blowing, really.
I'm genuinely lost for words now. I know it's not good podcasting, but
There's nothing you can say that wouldn't be repeating
what we said over the past 6 weeks.
It's not really comparing apples with apples, but I still think you can look at other nations and their responses. And I know it's easy to be perfect with hindsight, but our response, and as we've seen with the deaths ticking over to 40,000, cannot be praised in any way. Later on, we'll be talking about the economy, and that probably will be the deepest thing we go into, because there's quite a lot to talk about with government plans and things like that, and what they can potentially do for us all. We wouldn't have to have such a huge economic push towards our previous potential if we had tackled the crisis a bit more, because then there'd be less stress about reopening things, because there wouldn't be cases and there wouldn't be all the deaths to say, right, well, we've got to be careful. Countries like New Zealand can open their economies because they've got such little risk of spreading the virus with no deaths.
Well, no, they've had it's like no new community cases or infections in 3 weeks, and you're going, this is mad.
Yeah.
I wish I lived in New Zealand.
Maybe for this period in time, yes. One thing that I was going to bring up was plans to make face masks mandatory. Now, after spending...
Mandatory. It's mandatory.
Okay. After spending 2 days at work at McDonald's in a face mask, I now understand the calls to make it mandatory, because not only do I think...
Mandatory!
Not only do I think it made me feel more secure, so people will be more likely to get back into jobs and things like that, but obviously me wearing one might not stop me getting it, but if I'm not passing it on and nobody else can pass it on because they've all got face masks on. I wore one for probably a total amount of time of 15 hours over the weekend at work, and it didn't really bother me all that much. My ears started to hurt a little bit, but you can get little clips that go on the back of your head so they don't actually end up on your ears.
Yeah, I think it should be mandatory for everyone, because it's an effective way of reducing the spread.
Even if it's just a facial covering, not a mask. If you can't get your hands on a mask, or make one.
It should be mandatory, not just advisable.
So then I was going to talk about the R rate. Now, our listeners, all 4 of you, we've got 19 subscribers and we've got 18 views on our last video. It means one of our subscribers didn't listen. I'm just saying, in the edit, I want to know how many hours of editing I put in per listener. You know what I mean? Like, I do 4 hours of editing per listener we get, or something. I don't know.
Folks are going to be really impressed with this that you've done.
Right. So the majority of our listeners will live in the northwest, and so I wanted to bring that up just because the R rate is hovering somewhere between 0.75 and 1, but in the northwest it seems to be
0.8 to 1.1 or something.
Yeah, exactly. Estimates show that it could be over 1, which means that each person is infecting more than one other. So it's not like the virus is just staying stable at a X amount of cases, but it could be growing again. So I wouldn't call it a second.
I wonder why, because everyone's forgot that we're in a lockdown.
So I wouldn't call it a second peak, but I think there's a certain ripple and a wave.
There's a level of concern that we need to.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think it's the idea that this virus needs to be eradicated. Not, the amount of deaths it's caused, it's tragic, but it's also the disruption that you don't like, hence why you're flouting the rules, right? If you don't like it, then the stricter you stay with yourself, the quicker you can go to your house parties, the quicker you can spend a day in a field getting drunk with your mate, or whatever it is you might want to do.
Fresh week.
So all I'm trying to say is that the kind of people who are flouting the rules are also the kind of people who are pissed off about the rules.
Exactly, yeah. I read an article the other day saying schools will be back to normal January 2021 at best.
Yeah, what was that in the Times or the Telegraph?
I think so, yeah. And then
I read that.
Got emails from my 2 universities, my firm and insurance. Keele University sent me an email Wednesday saying what they're going to do, and they have they showed me they have this chart system, a bit like the government's one year, stage 5, stage 4, stage 3, stage 2, stage 1. And they say they'll be at stage 3 at the start of the academic year, which means you can only mix with the people in your flat, so you can go into uni accommodation, but you have to stay with them at all time. You won't be allowed any lectures at the beginning, but you will be allowed seminars. And then it'll be like stage 2 will be like 50-50 lectures, but this stage 1 will be towards the end of the academic year, maybe the start of the next one.
Sounds like great fun, Will. Can't lie. $9,000 a year, is that?
£9,250. I just want to get on with it now. as long as I'm staying at university.
For the year 12 listeners out there who, again...
Yeah, talk to you as your experience of being a year 12 student, James. Can you talk me through what's going to happen?
Right, so our school, we will be going back a couple of days a week, more for kind of like morale purposes rather than learning, really.
I read the newsletter and it said you're going to be doing personal statements rather than actual learning.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's more about
stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Uni prep and things like that, just because you can learn at home on your own. There's two options being discussed about exams for my year. One is postponing...
I did hear that there could be a possibility that you're not going to do any exams because it's been disrupted that much.
Yeah, so one of them is postponing them from May to July. And so one thing I have to say to that proposal is no.
Do you want a summer, James?
Yeah, I'd like a summer. The other option is that we do what's happened to the year 13s this year, where the teachers still set us work to do, and it's a bit like coursework. And so the work you have done is assessed, as coursework is. It's a non-exam assessment, and so the teachers will just grade you based on your ability and what they sort of recognise of you. And I prefer that, really. I don't mind. I'm not against exams. I'm not one of those people, but I think I'd rather have that than have my exams postponed. More on schools it is going to be staged, so you almost be doing shifts. So so it'll be nice to see everybody and be back in the environment.
Well,
but
I still don't see how it's going to work for.
Yeah, it'll be difficult. I don't mind the idea of getting our grades handed to us on a plate. I'm not going to be honest.
I think as long as this goes on and as more complicated as it gets, I can see definitely you guys or having either drastically lower grade boundaries or having similar to the same system as us.
Yeah.
That's where
I think it could be potentially a combination of the two. So like half exam, half non-exam. Yeah, so moving on from schools, and is there anything else that you were going to say about the COVID crisis in the UK? It's been a relatively slow news week for it. I think things are just ticking along, apart from...
No, I think other stories have dominated over that.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that the biggest story to come out of it is really about the economic stuff that's going to be talked about later. So moving on from the COVID crisis, you're right. I think other things have dominated the news agenda. I think the people who are partaking in such event are glad it's in the headlines because that is their sole aim.
Yeah, the protests, the UK protests, and I think we're going to focus on this week's events, the events that we saw in Bristol and in London, defacing and bringing down of statues. Do you want me to do my spiel on it, and then I'll...
Yeah, well, you can talk us through what happened in Bristol. We'll start there, because that was quite a big story.
Yeah, so Bristol yesterday, there was a statue of Edward Colston, who was a slave trader. He traded, it was thought, up to 100,000 slaves and profited off that. And the statue wasn't there for slave trading. He was a man that was seen as... He built Bristol, but however, he made his money out of the slave trade, which was historic and barbaric, and I can get why. And it's one of the black spots on history. Well, there's many black spots on history, but this one is one of the biggest. It's not the first time people have tried to get rid of it. They've tried to get rid of it for a number of years because they don't want to see that being celebrated in the history. But I wouldn't say it's celebrated. I'd say it's a mark of where we should never go again. And I agree with Keir Starmer, should be put in a museum, an educational tool of why we can never go back to that. This is also the same in London as well, how the Churchill statue was defaced with the graffiti on it. He was a racist. And then also the cenotaph in London as well had Black Lives Matter on it as well. And we can start to see these Black Lives Matter protests, especially in London, become increasingly more violent and perform criminal damage. And James, I want your opinion on that now.
I think we were talking about this last night, Will, and earlier on today. I think the issue with I'm going to call this extreme action, because whilst it is criminal, right, tearing down a statue which is public property or defacing and graffitiing on things, I'm going to call it extreme behaviour simply because not really violent, if that makes sense, but it's not. I wouldn't put it under the class of peaceful protesting either. What I think it does, and as we were discussing, it pushes away the moderates, the kind of people who
are needed for change.
Yeah, exactly.
What we need to figure out here is What do we want out of these protests? Do we want legislative change? Do we want a change in society or the change in police? And the only way we can do that is through, again, the halls of power. With this, especially the fallout of the media today, this subject issue has gone from talking about Black Lives and police brutality, etc., and our relationship with race, into criminal knowledge. Should we have statues of slave traders?
Exactly. I think it detracts away from the message as well. In
Yes.
that, it causes a stir, and it sort of, you know, people end up getting angry, like, why are you defacing a statue of Churchill? And the argument is that he was a racist and he believed in white supremacy, but that's not regardless of, you know, the circumstances. That's not why the statue's there. It's not celebrating Churchill the racist. It's celebrating the defeat of the Nazis and the fascism, right? And so I think people need to separate a person and from a person's achievement. So, for example, Gandhi, right? He prevented his wife from getting medical treatment, and then she later died because it was a part of his protest against British colonial rule in India. And yet when it came to him being ill, he ended up taking the medical help. And so is Gandhi a misogynist? Well, I don't know, but does that mean that he can't be celebrated if he is? It seems to be that people can't separate a person from their achievements, and that really ends up annoying a lot of people, the moderates who we were talking about. And it's a good metaphor you can use. So if you look at the Blair government, Blair knew that the only way to get Labour into power was to compromise, right? And so instead of having a sort of Michael Foot style party where you end up with, you know, or a Corbyn style party where you end up with a very left wing ideological socialist environment, it pushes people away and it kind of scares them. And so if you don't appeal to the people in the middle, you're not likely to get a lot of change. But Blair understood that, and so he got elected after, you know, forming a sort of centrist Labour Party, and then he did all the good that came from his administration. And I think with the protests, if you're taking the, as I was saying earlier, extreme action, you're going to push people away and you're going to annoy some people, like, why are you defacing Winston Churchill, a national hero?
As a protest, you don't need to give up your views. Like, do you think Martin Luther King ever came to a compromise? No, he just styled it in a way where he opened it up for discussion. He never advocated for bringing down statues and defacing. And that's the way I think you need to go in this sort of way, to open it up. You don't have to compromise your views. You just have to talk about your experiences or what you want to see to get more people on side. When you tear down statues and you deface cenotaphs and statues of Winston Churchill, it's going to alienate more people. And the protest is wanting to bring about change. It's not going to happen through that, is it?
When I say the protesters should almost compromise a bit like the new Labour government, I'm not saying that they should compromise their ideas of what they're pushing for with you know, the campaign of equal rights and, you know, justice and, you know, reducing institutionalized racism. That is evidently very necessary, but the compromise comes in the ways of protesting. So you may really, really, really want to push that statue over, but if it's not going to be helpful to the protest in itself, then don't do it.
I do agree. It's not right to have statues of slave traders around. That thing does belong in a museum to educate people, or there should be at least like a plaque on the statue saying, this is not to celebrate, this is an educational purpose, to remind us of where we should never go in history yet again.
It could have been done in a slightly less controversial way. I'm sure nobody's angry that the statue was torn down because they believe in the slave trade. I think it's more the fact that it's like
they were committing criminal damage.
Criminal damage, and it could have been removed through, you know, a petition or something. I know it's been
they have tried before.
Well, I know it's been an issue of contention for a long time, but now this movement's really coming to the forefront. It's no longer a minority issue. People will, as this movement grows legs, people aren't going to be thinking, well, it's just a statue. They'll understand that it's wider and bigger than that. And so I think this could have been the opportunity for it to be taken away with a peaceful protest.
People like Boris is turned away. You know, he's using terms like thuggery now and then. You go, and it's turning people against it, having more ammunition to fire at these protests.
The best way to protest should always be peacefully, and if that's not an option, it's going to sound strange, but I think the protest should be almost planned and not designed as such, but thought through in a way of how effective will this be, rather than just acting on instincts. I'm angry at a statue, so I'm going to tear it down. Well, is that really going to be very helpful to you? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's playing into those people's hands that want to keep the status quo, and as a result of these actions, potentially we could never see any more change.
It's just a risk that I wouldn't take when it comes to the protesting, and nor do I ever think you should condone criminal activity. Right? There's no point in fighting fire with fire. I'm not sure it's about changing the message. It's just changing the ways of delivering the message. Are we good to move on? Is there other things you want to talk about the protests? I think we covered a lot last week, and so
yeah.
If you're one of the 18 people who did listen, then well done. But if you're not, go back and listen for our full take on the whole situation.
Donald
Trump, yeah, wow, of course.
He's had an interesting week. So there were reports on Monday that he hid in a bunker from the protests, weren't there? And then the next day he came out with a short speech saying that he condemns all violence, and he's on the side of the peaceful protesters. All while by the time there was a peaceful protest going on, he sent in riot police to tear gas them and charge them away. Also, he could have a photo opportunity with the Bible. And when you say you're the ally of peaceful protesters and then do that on a peaceful protest, it's not painting him in a really good light, is it?
No, and then once he was sort of waving his Bible around, many influential Christians in the church in America later denounced Donald Trump almost and said, he does not hold our values, and he's not someone that we believe is a true Christian and follows the teachings of the Lord.
Have you ever heard him in the 2016 election when they talk about the Bible, and he goes, so they say the Bible is your favourite book, can you tell us which segment is your favourite? And he goes, I think it's all a great book. And he's going, well, would you prefer Old Testament or New Testament? And he goes, both. I love both. It's a great book. It's a fantastic book. And he clearly has no idea.
He's never read it.
And he just goes, but surely you know how he held the Bible up like that? Surely you held it over your heart. Like if those are your values. But what I found interesting was the church was occupied by a pastor, and the Secret Service had to evict him.
Spaghetti or fusilli or tagliatelle.
What?
A pastor.
Oh, you know what I mean? So a pastor had to be evicted by the Secret Service because he didn't want Trump to come there. I just think the whole thing was so ill thought out, and that's why his poll numbers are doing so badly at the moment. It's not good in the run up to an election.
Will, talk us through the polls then that you're referencing. And
first, I'd like to talk about, I think we can see his styling of the his campaign now is going to be, if you haven't watched 13th on Netflix, I think me and James can strongly recommend you do. It's a really good documentary. The one thing I found interesting was in the Nixon part of the documentary, the way he talks about law and order, and Trump's tweeting out so much about law and order now, clamping down on these protests, which the same could be seen in 1968 in the riots after Martin Luther King died. He's trying to win those rural working class voters over again. However, the way he's doing it is not like Nixon. Nixon was a good campaigner. He can describe why he wants law and order, whereas Trump has Twitter-style campaigning. And then troops and tear gas is not the way to go as well. So, I hurt him in the polls as well. So the national approval rating for Donald Trump is now got lower again. So it's now at 38% approve of him and 57% disapprove. Then I looked at some polls. So today CNN came out with a poll saying Biden now has a 14% lead. I read other polls that say he has a 5% lead nationally against Trump. But here are the interesting ones. So I looked at a load of polls together, and it said, so I collated some from the swing states, and I got these from Fox News. So Fox News is traditionally this Trump-supporting news channel, which is very right-wing and supports Trump. However, it says Wisconsin, which is seen as the key swing state this time, Biden has got 49% of the poll, in contrast to Trump 40%. Michigan is the same as Wisconsin, so Biden has a 49% vote share in the polls. And Ohio, another swing state, is 45 Biden, 43 Trump. And that's from Fox News as well. But what I'd say is don't necessarily listen to the polls. Obviously, because what happened in 2016, Trump was far behind in the polls all the way up until election day. And I'd also say that the underdog effect is so much more important and influential in American elections. And you've got the silent Trump voters who say they'll vote for Biden or Clinton, but then switched to Trump in the last couple of days. However, if he continues with this rhetoric of law and order and using tear gas while these protests go on, I think it's going to harm his chances even more.
Very comprehensive assessment of it all. I just think that with the whole Trump situation is you're right about the polls. You can't really trust them just because people may end up defaulting. And again, with the economic stuff, he can twist it in his favour.
So people can go, I'm not going to vote today because Biden's clearly going to win. I was going to vote for Biden. And you could be in a swing state in Florida or Ohio, and it's just not going to happen. Whereas people who are sympathetic to Trump go, oh no, we need Trump to vote, and let's get Trump out to vote. And all the people who campaign for Trump are going doing double time the work that Biden does because it's so assumed that he's going to win.
Well, that's what I was thinking about the Fox News polls. Are they publishing the fact that Trump is behind enormous is an idea to say, look at this, you know, this isn't good enough. We need more support and we need more campaigning and we need Trump to be backed more. It's almost like a scare people into voting, scare people who Trump supporters to go out and vote for him because he's not, you know, doing in the polls and they're saying that they can't get complacent. I don't know. Yeah. It's just an idea. It's very much divide and conquer is the Trump rhetoric, isn't it? It's like us versus them, and then as soon as if he wins a second term, there's no unity. It's not like he's won the election and then he's trying to get everybody back together again. It's just we are the majority, you're the minority.
It's very much, he knows his way to win an election is I'm going to appeal to my base. I'm going to rule for them. I'm not trying to be like the guy that let's bring the whole country together. That's the way he sees to win an election.
In simple terms, he needs to appeal to about half of the population, and then he's done his job. He doesn't need to try and get a united country because that's just not what he doesn't need the United States of America. He just needs, 25 of them.
He needs 4 swing states.
So yeah, if that's a wrap for the first half of the podcast, I'd say. And then we'll come back. We've got a few more points to talk about. Worst article, a game. And then that'll be it. So if you're not going to listen to this all the way through, maybe you're getting a little bit restless and you fancy a snack or a bite to eat or something to drink, now's your time. Now the next few minutes you'll probably hear it's just me and Will messing around whilst we're on our break. So go and grab yourself a biscuit. Will, what's this week's biscuit? Last week it was a digestive.
Ginger nut.
Oh, I'm not a fan of ginger.
That is highly offensive.
I'm saying hobnobs, guys. Go and get a hobnob.
The marine of biscuits.
Yeah,
if anyone gets that, fair play.
Peter Kay.
Yes.
Love it. Yes. Right. Yeah. So go and get yourself a hobnob, not a ginger nut. And I'm going to go and get a cup of tea and another can of Coke, and then we'll see you in a bit.
When Matt Hancock looks down the camera, it's one of the scariest things I think I've ever seen. I don't like it. It's just his eyes. Have you seen those jokes about stop looking at me?
I want you to guess what my snack is. Now, we didn't have any digestives in, which was not, we didn't have any hobnobs in, which I'm sad about. So I've got some.
I didn't go get any ginger nuts.
We're setting a bad example. I'm just going to put my kettle on in my bedroom. So if you can hear background noise, good job. This is the break. So I want you to guess, right, what my snack is alongside crisps and hummus. Right, I'll give you a clue. Its name has an item of clothing in it, but it's still a food.
No, I've got no idea.
It's an item of clothing you put on when you're cold.
Coat.
Close.
Jacket.
Yeah.
Why is the only thing that comes into my head a jacket potato?
Because that's what I've got.
Is that actually?
Yeah, I've got it. We had jacket potatoes last night, and we had some left over because I don't know, the family wasn't feeling very hungry, and my mum put quite a lot in. So I've got a jacket potato with a snack. And literally just on its own, no toppings. It's cold. It's been in the fridge. Right, Will. It's time for this week's instalment of me pouring a can of Coke into a glass of ice, and then straight after that, it'll be me pouring hot water into a mug of coffee granules. So we're having double ASMR this week. When I opened the can of Coke, it opened rather violently, and so I've got Coke all over me.
That's what Michael Gove says, mate.
That's the coffee granules. Now they're in the mug. You ready? Here goes.
I'm not allowed to bring any hot food upstairs.
Yeah, the jacket potato's cold, mate.
Yeah,
I'm not
what I
allowed.
mean?
I'm not allowed any food upstairs, but that doesn't stop me.
Oh,
Oh.
you a rebel.
I know. I have my breakfast up here as well.
I don't know why. I've become really interested this week in old space missions, like to the moon and the Saturn V rocket. And you know how when a rocket lifts off, you know you get that crackle. It's the flames being fired out at supersonic speed is where the crackle comes from.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Fact of the week.
You never did your run to the kitchen to get some quavers this week.
No, that's because I already got. I was already prepared, mate. I already got mine.
I've got my jacket potato and I've just dipped it in some hummus. It's tasty. You have crisps and hummus. What's wrong with jacket potato and hummus?
No. You've said you've done some really bad things this week. You can't say mandatory, right? Now you're dipping hummus with jacket potato. Oh dear.
Was that a burp?
Yeah, that didn't mean I don't know where that came from.
That's staying in. So welcome back from the break. That was a bit of a shambles because me and Will just ended up talking for longer than expected. What a surprise. Today's not been a very focused day. I was expecting it to be quite focused given the fact that I've got a lot to do today. But hey ho, things aren't always as you expect them to be. And
I think it's because you said we're going to do a range of subjects.
Yes, we've got more time in between the subjects to just chat rubbish. We've decided to move on to another topic for today, and it's all about the resurgence of the Madeleine McCann case. It's popped up back in the newspapers because there has been a development due to a new suspect called Christian Bruckner, who is a German. He's currently serving a 7.5-year sentence after he was arrested for raping a 72-year-old US tourist in Milan in 2005. Age 17, he molested a 6-year-old girl in 1994. And so there have been lots of cases that he could have been involved in with disappearing children. And so yesterday's Sunday Telegraph had a big double-page spread all about 4 cases, including Madeleine McCann. The reason it's come back in the headlines is because they kind of been putting a few connections together and he could be linked to it. And so he's now the new prime suspect for the investigation. The 4 cases are a boy who disappeared on a beach in 1996, a girl who disappeared in 1996 in Belgium whilst on a walk, 16-year-old girl. Madeleine McCann, obviously, who disappeared 2007 from the apartment, as we all know. And then in 2015, a German girl disappeared whilst walking with some friends to collect wood for a family barbecue local to their house. And so Bruckner has been seen driving a 1,600-mile route between Bavaria and the Algarve, which he's made on numerous occasions. And so one of the ideas behind this is that he's literally been scouting out for victims for his attacks, and so it links Madeleine McCann locally at the time of the disappearance, and there's been sightings of his camper van that he used to have around the area and things like that at the time.
VW camper van.
It's a really old tatty VW camper van
from 1980, isn't it? Mind you, I must think this is the guy now. Now they've gone public on it and we know his face. I think this could be the one. Finally. The
article in front of me just talks about how he could be connected to the case, among others. It says he was living in a camper van in Praia da Luz at the time of her abduction. Madeleine's disappearance and his mobile phone records link him to the area the night she went missing. He received a phone call from 7:30 p.m, which ended at 8 p.m.
I've just scoured the news for a brief second and it said he was tipped off by a Praia da Luz worker, which is quite interesting.
Apparently. Madeleine is believed to have disappeared between 9 and 10 p.m. Bruckner moved back to Germany shortly afterwards. The tapas restaurant where Kate and Jeremy McCann were on the night of Madeleine's disappearance was just 50 metres away from their sleeping children. Spokeswoman for Madeleine's parents said they believed that the identification of the German suspect was the most significant development in 13 years. Clarence Mitchell, spokeswoman for the couple, said they have never given up hope that she is still alive and they simply just want to know what happened to her. German public prosecutors said they believed Madeleine was dead and the police were treating her disappearance as a murder investigation. As the spokeswoman said, this is potentially the most significant development in 13 years because the issue with the case is that it was never had significant development. It's almost like she vanished out of thin air.
Yeah.
And there was no leads to trace, and it's not like they had a suspect and they got away. They just
no, and it's like Portuguese police never took it seriously as well. Because he hired that Jaguar, didn't he, a day after she disappeared in someone else's name, which is
highly suspicious.
Exactly.
I mean, this is a guy who's a known child sexual predator who's been arrested and charged with many cases in the past, right? And so if he's in the area at the time, mobile phone records literally place him in the area. Not very long after the disappearance, drove back to his home in Germany, all the way from southwest Portugal, well over 1,600-mile trip.
Yeah.
You don't just do that for the sake of it. And maybe after 13 years, there may be some closure. But this guy also doesn't seem like the kind of person to want to cooperate with the police investigation. That's another little brief look in this week's news. Right, so Boris Johnson is almost turning into a Keynesianist kind of prime minister. So the government have got their levelling up agenda, right? So as we talked about last week, it's increasing investment into all areas of the economy to turn Britain away from just being a financial sector, but into something more of like a technological world leader and powerhouse. And so lots of investment, technological and scientific with, pharmaceuticals and things. Lots of this investment is being fast-tracked as a major drive to stimulate the economy. So if you think about it, it will be the government spending plans that were maybe meant to go ahead over, let's say, 10 years. Instead, it will be fast-tracked to all happen as quickly as possible, simply because it would put money into the economy. It will create jobs if they're building infrastructure, if they're trying to get affordable housing out, if they're trying to build HS2 or roads, investing in public transport or investing in green energy. This is all going to put lots and lots of money into the economy from the government. And it's a kind of, so for those who don't know, Keynesianism is the idea that you have to buy yourself out of a crisis, right? So
if the government invests then into companies, the companies will have more like stock on increased workers' wages. Workers will go out and spend the wages that can come back through taxation and of people and companies, and it's a whole circular thing.
Logic suggests that you've got a financial crisis, so you want to spend less money because you've already spent lots. But if you spend more, the Keynesian theory suggests that what happens is you're creating jobs, you're putting money back into industry, you're putting money back into people's pockets, so then they themselves can spend that money, and then they will then carry on the government's work, going out shopping more and buying more things, etc., etc., etc. So it's kind of like a little bit of a push. By you spending your money, you allow other people to then stimulate the economy. So it makes sense in that way. So things that will be on the agenda are using the government's increase of the annual science budget from 9 billion to 22 billion by 2024 to fund research institutions struggling from the loss of funding from foreign students. So that would be, fast-tracking the spending to stop labs and universities from struggling, which is, it makes sense.
Couldn't that also be like, because a lot of the funding came from the EU as well, so they're trying to counterbalance that funding that they got from the EU.
And so another thing would be fast-tracking the hospital building that they were going to do. And so that's obviously, giving out private sector contracts for companies to build hospitals, and you're putting money back into industry. And then there's another thing that was a drive for apprenticeships. So they want people to build more skills and to gain in productivity. So they're saying how they try and get apprenticeships for every single young person between 18 to 24. Which is quite good.
So is this them trying to push them T levels again?
Yeah, so I think it's the idea of that if apprenticeships are wanted, they can be taken, and so you wouldn't end up with people not knowing what to do or not having any opportunities. You're giving people skills and almost educating the nation in the industry.
With more and more people going to university and less going into manufacturing jobs, I think they desperately want to make those manufacturing jobs seem appealing again to get the economy going, rather than having a load of people in university.
I think you're right, and it's also it works for employers as well, because obviously with an apprenticeship you're paid to learn, but you're not paid on a full wage, and so it means that the businesses that are struggling won't have to have even more financial costs of training people and then paying them to work, a full wage. And so whilst people say apprenticeship wages aren't good enough, if you look at them as an alternative to university where you pay to get educated, it actually seems like an all right deal. So it helps industry. It helps people who want to become skilled. It helps the nation to get a more productive and skilled workforce. So I think that's a really good idea. Now, other things is such as deregulation. So there's lots of little regulations in industry. And so just by reducing lots of red tape that's not particularly useful. So, for example, restaurants have to apply for a permit to make themselves a takeaway. If you get rid of that restriction, straight away, so many restaurants can just start giving takeaways and start trading more. And so deregulating lots of industry could be really another good idea that they're pushing for. And so I read an article.
Yeah, but it could also be really dangerous.
Well, so we're not talking about reducing standards, right? So we don't want to reduce standards of safety in products, or maybe like in banking, you don't want to, make it more risky, like the 2008 crisis.
Like what
but things such as,
especially now, is like a key time to invest in renewable energy and like electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure. The government now desperately want to build in jobs, and where's the biggest market coming from in terms of infrastructure? It's going to look at electrics and renewable energy. So I think the government are desperately trying to go put in a lot of engineering and a lot of money. Well, no, not engineering, a lot of money into that area to try and create jobs, because that's where the most demand is going to come from.
Yeah, I think if you stimulate the eco industry, it will be really good, because not only will we end up having sort of like fast forwarding the time it would take the private sector to invest in it, you then create a market that people can then use, and it'll then stimulate further growth in that industry because you've got viable options. So investing in electric vehicle infrastructure, investing in renewable source of energy, all of these things come together to stimulate the economy, because you're creating jobs and you're investing money and you're doing research and whatever it might be. But then you also create a new market. So now people will go out and buy more electric cars. So not only have you made money, not only created jobs by building all the infrastructure, but you're creating jobs through the increased demand. And so there's another scheme that was a 1.5 billion car scrappage scheme. So it's basically just cash for bangers, right? If you've got an old car, we'll give you $2,000 off a new one, or whatever it might be. And so that's a scheme that they've used in London a lot for vans to reduce emissions, which is quite good. If you get rid of your old diesel car that's throwing out 400 grams of carbon dioxide per kilometre to get a lovely new Nissan Leaf, which is all electric or whatever it might be, that's again stimulating the car industry. So here's a quote from the article. The Conservative manifesto also pledged a £28.8 billion pound investment in strategic and local roads, and £1 billion on a fast charging network to ensure that everyone is within 30 miles of a rapid electric vehicle charging station. Now,
like the ones that Tesla invest in.
Yeah, so it would be nice to be more than 30 miles within a station, right? Obviously. But these sort of, targets that are helping to boost investment. So whilst people may be crying out that this isn't a very conservative thing to do, I think in a time when the crisis is because people aren't spending enough as opposed to the banks collapsing, it's the perfect time for Keynesianism. I still think we need deregulation, though, to help stimulate growth. That's how the whole thing about the EU red tape.
It's got to be sensible deregulation, though. It can't be.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's got to be safe, and it's got to be, it can't, for example, I still think there should be regulation to meet environmental targets and things like that. But in areas where there's lots of bits of red tape that just really aren't necessary, like Sunday trading hours, just relax them. I want to be able to go on a Sunday and buy some Doritos, but it's 4 p.m, so I can't, and all the shops are shut. Why? It literally started off due to a religious thing. Why do we need it now?
Because it was a Sabbath.
Yeah, but we don't need it now. It will help stimulate the economy. If you just let the shops trade for more hours, I'm then going to go out and buy some chocolate to watch my film on a Sunday night with. But I can't, so I won't. Just get rid of them. Regulations like that. Regulations to do with...
It's very specific regulation.
Well, yeah, I know. Sunday trading hours is a good idea of regulations that you just get rid of because they're not necessary. One thing that I was going to say about Boris is this was Tim Shipman, Sunday Times. Let me dig it out. The moment Boris Johnson decided to move faster to lift the coronavirus lockdown can be dated precisely to a meeting on Tuesday morning when their Prime Minister blurted out the word Christ. Johnson was listening to a presentation on the economy from Rishi Sunak, and the Chancellor, and Alok Sharma, the Business Secretary. Johnson's outburst was prompted by Sharma outlining how 3.5 million jobs would be lost in the hospitality industry if pubs, bars and restaurants were not opened to reap the rewards of summer. So it's basically saying how all the data of potential loss of 3.5 extra million jobs was laid out to the Prime Minister, and this is what's really pushed him. The economic side of government almost have outlined all the issues, and so it's kind of put a little bit of mustard up his bottom, as Clarkson would say, and made him sort of decide to move a bit faster, simply because lots of people, when you talk about the economy, think that you're just prioritizing money over the coronavirus. But you've got to remember, unemployment costs lives too. And it can be long term or short term. It can be terrible for mental health, and so you end up with increased suicide. But it's not just that. You end up with people with worse standards of living, and so they end up with worse health, and they might begin addiction, and etc. 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 So it's all about lives and livelihoods, right? And so you don't want unemployment, and so where you can safely open up industry and get things back going, and then it's all about the stimulating the industry afterwards. We'll just have to hope and pray that it all works out.
Safely open up.
Yes. So here's another thing that's about a silly little regulations with weddings. I didn't know this until today. You can't have a wedding outside in Britain.
No.
You've got to have it inside. And so they're basically saying how late there are outdoor weddings in Tudor England. Let's go back to that. You can have an outdoor wedding. Everyone can socially distance. You can have a wedding on a golf course or something and lay out all the chairs really far away. And so that's a regulation. We don't need it. It's literally useless. Why can't I have a wedding outside?
I have no idea.
Exactly. So it's those sort of regulations, Will. It's not like get rid of the minimum wage or just destroy the trade unions. It's more just the idea of these small little niggling regulations that all add up, right? They all add up, especially in a time of crisis like this where you need as much freedom for businesses as you can get ethically. It could be the difference between, a job lost and a job saved, or thousands of jobs lost and jobs saved. So that's it, really. It's just the government are trying to deregulate, which is brilliant, and increase spending, which is at a time like this actually necessary, or fast track spending as opposed to increase it. It was always planned, but they're just going to try and get on with it quicker.
Worst news story?
So we find a return to the worst Guardian opinion piece. And the reason this is bad is just because it doesn't really say or do anything. Zoe Williams, and the headline is, "A world without hugs is a world that makes no sense. I'm thankful we in England are allowed some socially distant socialising, but how do you say goodbye without embracing?" And so she basically just talks about how when she says hello and goodbye to people, it's always to do with hugs, and how she doesn't know how to say goodbye to people without hugging them. And so to that I say, step 1, say the word good. Step 2, say the word bye. Step 3, turn around. Step 4, walk away and wave. Wave to your heart's content. She's basically just saying how it doesn't really make that much sense, is what I'm struggling with the article, because she's talking about how some people who would normally flout all rules and be really free-spirited are really up and tight on the regulations, and people you'd expect to be like, most diligent, rule-bound people who check their every step and only drink on a Friday are the ones who ask what on earth we're all doing outside when it's raining. Come on in, it's only a virus. She literally just talked about how she can't hug people, and I just thought it was a complete waste of my time.
The one I've picked out is just, the way I describe it is, only in this country will we do this.
I know about this article before we've discussed this, and it gives me a great sense of national pride that this is the country I live in.
Petition to replace Winston Churchill statue in Parliament Square with Gemma Collins gathers 90,000 signatures in the first hour.
Yay!
This is why petitions are pointless.
Well, I'm not sure petitions are pointless, but it's just the British public are a little bit...
No, petitions are just made as a joke.
Oh yeah, so some of them are really useful and important, but this is the country that phoned 999 when KFC ran out of chicken, So yeah. I can't really say I'm surprised, Will.
I've had to go to Burger King.
It's so funny.
So I'm just shaking my head and I go, why in the time that... It's just ridiculous.
I think about our generation, and I mean, it sums it up in one. It
sums it up perfectly, doesn't it?
Yeah, we are just mental. Well, you, whoever signed the petition, are mental. And it's also like we're in a generation where everything's a bit of a meme, and so people just do it for fun, and they start and they do lots of silly things. And I know every generation's like, thinks they're hilarious, but our generation just seems to be. We've got a very strange sense of humour. It's a bit surreal, and it's a bit, I don't know. It's a bit sign a petition to get Gemma Collins on the statue, kind of, rather than like zingers and one-liners. The meme generation strikes again. Insert game here. Right, so Will and I didn't record a game on Monday simply because we decided we'd wrap up because we spent so much time on call, chatting and having fun, that we didn't want even more time on a game, and neither of us had prepared one. So I've just put the game in now. We recorded it today. This is Thursday, as the podcast goes out. It's a bit rushed, and I didn't give an explanation because I had a video lesson that I'd forgotten about 10 minutes ahead of the recording. I'll explain the rules in a second. Oh, yeah, right. Quick, risk of fifth. We've got literally 10 minutes.
These are going to be party leaders.
Okay.
So,
Risk of Fifth, we played it a while back. We're in a rush because I've got a video lesson. We're not recording this on the Monday, the game. Right, so Risk of Fifth and the rules is really simple. So Will's devised the game. So you have a certain category, and you have the first 5 of said category. So for the first round we play, it's most recent Conservative Party leaders. So you have the first 5 most recent Conservative Party leaders. If you guess the first one, you'd get 1 point. If you guess the second, you get 2 points, and so on. And so it's all about whether you take the risk to go for the more obscure answer, which would be the 5th, so hence Risk of Fifth, or if you play it safe and go for somebody early. But you get no points if you choose the 6th, 7th, 8th, and so on. So the limit is 5. So I hope that makes sense. You'll pick it up if you haven't caught on.
Risk of Fifth, Conservative leaders.
Yeah, so Johnson, May, Cameron, Duncan Smith, Michael Howard.
4 points.
Oh, get in. Who's the 5th?
It was Duncan Smith.
Oh, I got
Duncan
them wrong
Smith,
around.
then Howard. Risk of Fifth, Labour leaders.
Oh, okay. So obviously Keir, Corbyn, Miliband, Brown, Blair.
Yeah, 5.
Oh, get in.
9. Risk of Fifth, Lib Dem leaders.
Oh, that's difficult. Does Ed Davey count? Who's the Sanders leader? Right. Davey, Swinson, Vince Cable, Tim Farron, Nick Clegg.
5 points!
Yes! This is so nerdy.
14. He's on 14. Now it gets hard.
Oh, no.
SNP.
Oh, I have no idea. Alex Salmond.
2 points.
Yeah, that's all I could do.
So you had Sturgeon, Salmon, Swinley, Salmond again, and then Wilson.
Oh.
Risk of Fifth, Green Party.
Oh, Caroline Lucas at some point.
See, this is another led and then led again.
Right, well, go for the most recent. What's the most recent leadership?
4 points then. And now I'm on presidential candidates from 2016 back.
Oh, mate, I have no idea.
So for an incumbent, so you can't have Obama 2008. So it's just literally Obama in 2008. So you can't have him in 2012.
Okay. Oh man, right. What party? Democrat.
Democrat.
I actually have no idea. I'm just gonna say Bill Clinton.
He's got 5 points.
No! Oh my god!
It's Clinton, Obama, Kerry, Gore, Clinton. What are you on? You got
4, 5, 5.
You got 14, 16,
25.
25. Republican.
Oh god. No idea. Bush.
4 points.
Yes, that'll do.
So for the Republicans, you had Trump, McCain, Bush, and Bob Dole.
Yeah.
Well done, James.
That was a really good game, and also perfectly within the time. We recorded that in about 5 minutes, and then let's wrap up.
Do you want to do an outro?
I'll do the outro, yeah, because you molested it last week.
I didn't molest it.
Your name is. You're the. Of the
That's not funny.
world.
That's not funny. It's a little bit funny, but it's not funny.
Yeah. No, it is funny.
It's a very insensitive joke at this time, James.
Oh, it's years ago. Get over it. It's only a. That is so getting cut out. Good job I do the editing, isn't it?
It is. Just remember, I want a civil service job by the end of this. So.
Will, it's been absolutely lovely wasting half a day with you, just chatting absolute rubbish over the phone. And along that, there's been a few speckles of podcast-worthy content. This podcast might end up being about 30 seconds long because that's all I can salvage from it. But with that said,
apologise to people saying sorry, we've not done a good job.
Yeah, so I got up very late today and haven't really. I'm a bit tired. I'm a bit giddy. Sorry if this has been a bit strange. Sorry if you're not a fan of the new format of kind of talking about more than 3 different things.
I'm not.
We thought we'd give it a go on a news week where things have been slightly different to usual. So you've been listening to Something Near the Centre, a podcast about politics, economics and current events. I'd like to thank you very much for listening. See you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Right, well, editing that is going to be absolutely god awful.
I thought Dominic Cummings one would be the worst one ever. That is awful.
Thank you for listening to Something Near the Centre. The podcast was presented by Will Turner and James Baker, and edited by me, James Baker. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.